Paul George has a bone bruise in his hyperextended knee, no structural damage. He's probably, I would assume, not going to play for the rest of the preseason. The regular season begins next Tuesday night or next Wednesday night, I believe, for the 76ers. And Joel Embiid is already out for the preseason, just because he's Joel Embiid. And I believe he told Tim Bontemps of ESPN, if I had to guess, I will probably never play back-to-backs for the rest of my career. I don't know exactly how that makes you feel, Ice. That don't make me feel good, but what say you?
I'll start by saying that me living in South Jersey and have always been an assumed 76ers fan, it does not make me feel good. It makes me feel like Joel Embiid is doing what a lot of us hate in big men. I think it's a word that starts with S, has an F and a T. And like
S-O-F, capital T, soft. That's a line from the movie Life. That was right before Eddie Murphy got hit in the face by that big dude who tried to take his cornbread.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, it's just a balance, right? Like, you're the 76ers, you bring in Paul George, you have Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, like, you're putting together a roster that can compete for the Eastern Conference, and it's just all about health. It's all about health at this point. I think with Paul George, the thing that's concerning to me about this is that I'm glad it's a bone bruise and that they're not concerned. But he played 76 games last season. That was the first time that he had played more than 56 games since 2018, 2019. So my thoughts are just like, hey, is this just the aftermath of you playing so many games, being able to go hard, and now maybe we deal with this your first year in Philly? So hopefully it's nothing, but I think that's lingering in the back of my mind, is that it's coming off of a season where he played a ton of games and hasn't played that many games in a very long time. But I think you have to manage them, like this. It's going to be a test of how do you manage these injuries and make sure that players stay healthy throughout the season. And then obviously the playoffs.
It's a double-edged sword for me. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, because not even dovetailing, we're going to stay right here in this space. But Michael Malone the other day, head coach of the Denver Nuggets, one-time champion removed, he said something about his team right before a preseason game where he talked about, we don't condition well enough. Like, as a basketball culture, I think he was saying. I don't think he was saying necessarily his team specifically, but he was basically saying we are coaching out of fear now, where we don't condition our players enough in the preseason. We're afraid to run our players, through the regular season, through the playoffs. I remember talking to a head coach maybe a week ago, and I was just asking him about the difference between training camps before and now. This isn't a coach who's coached 30 years ago. This is someone who's been in the trenches. And he talked about, Ice, the lack of lag time from the start of training camp to once the regular season starts. Like, training camp basically begins on October 1st, and game one of the regular season will be 3 weeks later. I don't know if that's enough time to condition your guys, even if they're coming in and you're just doing informal get-togethers and everything else, but to actually go hard when you don't have the two-a-days, when you don't have the things that make it hard. I don't know how guys can handle hard. And I think so much of this NBA, not that you can't preserve guys' bodies, because I just think there's a cost that comes with being an NBA player.
Right.
And the cost is sometimes, hey, you got to push yourself. Like, that's what it is. We accept that cost when we talk about the NFL, I think. We accept that. We look at the NFL and say, that's a gladiator sport. If you get hurt, you get hurt. And next man up, and we move on. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
the career
it's not pretty, but that's
expectancy
what
isn't
it is.
as long. Yeah. And you're not expected to play as long. And so it's already assumed. I agree with you.
And then the other part of, all these guys want to play for 20 years. So they're never really pushing themselves in the way that says, okay, we got a championship opportunity right now. Like, let's go for it. And for me, the lack of conditioning, I won't say the lack of strenuous conditioning, like sometimes you got to push yourself. And one thing that the coach told me, Ice, was, how can a player push himself in the playoffs where you're playing every other day? Like, you don't have the long breaks in between games. You're playing, you got a day off the next day, or you got to plan, then you got a practice day, then you're playing the next day, and then you're traveling. Like, something is happening physically every day, and that's after an 82-game season. So nobody's going to be fresh. And to assume that Joel Embiid, throughout his career, who has never been quote unquote fresh, is going to be fresh now, I don't know if that's necessarily the strategy of a winning championship sort of team. I get you wanting to be healthy, but health hasn't always been the issue for Joel Embiid. Ice. Sometimes it's been performance. Sometimes he just has not played well in playoff situations. Last year was a little bit of a difference. He had the Bell's palsy. That did not look good. He was coming off of the knee injury already, and he played really well in that short series against the New York Knicks. But by and large, there were series where he came up short, and I don't know if I will always attribute health to that, or if I do, Ice, nobody's 100% in the playoffs because nobody's supposed to be healthy in the playoffs or 100% in the playoffs.
Right. And it's also tough too. Like, you look back at his season last year, he only played 39 games. And so you talk about getting into the playoffs. If he hasn't played a ton of games during the season, the expectation is so high during the playoffs that you have to be fresh. And so then I think it doesn't leave room for what you just said, maybe not playing well, maybe not having a good game. It's like, dude, you barely played during the season. Now we're in the playoffs. You need to be on the money every game. And we know as humans, as basketball players, sometimes it's just not your day that day. And so I agree with you. I think it's been a bit of both, which is why the frustration for the Sixers can be so high, right? Like you're dealing with sometimes he's able to play, sometimes he's not. He's not always consistent when he's on the court. You bring in Paul George, who we know has struggled with injuries. This is his last push to really get something going towards the end of his career. It's just hard to keep everybody healthy. And that's literally like what it's banking on. But you're like you said, it's not just about health, right? We also have to then get on the court, play well together, have chemistry, and play consistent basketball. That is something that else has to be developed.
You just hit the important thing for me, Ice. You talked about chemistry, right? And can you develop chemistry and continuity if you're never actually playing together when it's hard? Right. And I look at the Celtics last year. Right? Like Kristaps Porzingis was kind of in and out because of his injuries, which you expect a guy who's 7'4" and his injuries to have. But Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, those guys played the lion's share of games and minutes, and they developed a continuity that they were able, and a sweat equity by and large, that you were able to cash in on once the playoffs began. And if you don't have that, if you don't know how to play together when it's hard, I don't know how you can win the playoffs when you got the Boston Celtics to deal with, the New York Knicks to deal with. God forbid the Milwaukee Bucks, who have honestly the most continuity outside of the Celtics amongst the top teams. Even though they really, you don't look at them as having any because of the Dame Lillard thing last year. I'm a firm believer in continuity meaning something when it comes. You have to have something to lean on as far as a collective unit of knowing, okay, Joel wants the ball here. This is how we play through him when, it's game 5 of a playoff series and it's the fourth quarter and we really have to have something to lean on. I don't know if this is the strategy. I know everybody brings up the Kawhi Leonard year where he didn't play back-to-backs. He played 60 games and they won a championship. But he was dragging that leg towards the end of that. Secondarily, Kawhi Leonard was a friggin' cyborg, right? Yeah. I don't know if Joel Embiid is a cyborg. I don't know if Paul George is a cyborg. I'm going to ask you this one because this wasn't on the rundown. Is Paul George a superstar or a superstar talent?
Ooh. I
got ice stumped, y'all. I got ice stumped.
That's a good one. I think I'm going to say he's a superstar. Like, I think we've seen consistency in his game. There's somewhere in my notes where I have his numbers over his career and this and that, but I feel like in what he showed us in his consistency, when he's healthy and he plays, he's a superstar. I think. But let me get your thoughts. I feel like you posed the question.
I posed the question for a reason. Because I think for me, and I have a more, shall we say, like discerning definition of superstar. I don't need to know anything else. I just need to know that you're there and you're showing up and we got a chance. That only applies to maybe a handful of players in today's game. I don't think that necessarily applies to Paul George. And whether he's a number 1, number 2, like I'm not necessarily tripping on that. When I saw him lead the Clippers to the Western Conference Finals in 2021, when Kawhi Leonard, towards ACL against Utah. I was like, oh, okay, he's in full bloom. He has all the tools to be the superstar player for a month stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Can he be that can he be that for an entire season? Maybe you're going to tell me back, Vinny, he doesn't have to be a superstar player because he's playing next to Joel Embiid. He's playing next to Tyrese Maxey. Very true. All he has to do is be the 3-and-D guy that maybe his talent and his demeanor says that he should be, as opposed to having to carry. But when you're playing next to Joel Embiid and his health is a question, you need someone capable of being a superstar because you don't know if Joel Embiid's going to show up health-wise.